All right, so we've been kind of referring, so in the meantime, now here we are. We've been referring to Daniel 7 and 8, and so let's actually take a look at what they actually say. Daniel's dream of four beasts here, and I've did what we did in Revelation. I just printed them out and then put some notes in there also. So let's just go ahead and read these. Starting with chapter 7, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. And then I note there on the right-hand side, Scripture interprets Scripture. Beginning in verse 15, Daniel actually interprets the dream, so we don't actually have to go too far to find out what does this dream mean. Daniel will do it for us, or actually God will do it to Daniel. Okay, so we don't have to search real far to find out what this dream means. So he wrote down the substance, and then later we'll find out what it means. So somebody start reading at anyway, here's verse 2. Here's the dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." First one, somebody, verse 4.
The first was a lion and had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of the human was given to it.
Okay, great, thanks. Somebody read verse 5.
There before me was the second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh."
Thanks, and somebody else read verse 6.
After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule.
Okay, thanks, and somebody else read verse 7.
After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns.
Okay, thanks, and somebody else read verse 8, please.
While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. The horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, let's just pause there for a moment. Daniel, beginning at verse 15, is going to say, here's the interpretation of this, but what he ends up doing is he says in verse 17, "The 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever." Then I wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast. So he doesn't really worry about what each one of those 3 beasts represent previously. So let's ask these questions this way in the right column. I think we can do 3 different conversations here, maybe a little bit different. Let's try this one. What happens, what's the conversation look like if we think about each of these beasts represent a particular nation in history? What's that conversation look like? What would it look like if we said, let's imagine that each one of these beasts is a particular nation in history. How would that conversation go?
I'm assuming iron would be Rome.
Okay. You put a label to each, the iron one would be Rome.
Right.
Okay.
Leopard was Alexander.
Leopard could be Alexander.
Now,
Bear would be, if you're going backwards like that, then the bear would be the Persian and the Medes.
and
Bear
the
could be
lion would
Persian.
be, yeah, the lion would be Babylon.
Lion could be Babylon, and in fact, we in archaeology, you know, there are lion things, you know, on the thrones and
with
stuff
the-
in Babylon.
all the
and all
Babylonian
that,
things.
yeah. Yeah, so you could do it that way and put those particular labels on, okay, if you wanted to do that. Okay. What would be the advantage of doing that? Putting those labels onto, attaching those labels to those particular nations?
Because that was in Daniel's day, and it was even prophesizing.
Okay.
Because Rome wasn't around in his day
Okay.
either. But you can also have the soothsayers of our day, and we can put it also in our modern age too. These representatives of these different animal characters.
Okay,
So, of course, our soothsayers are writing books and making money.
well, yeah, that's,
Yeah. We could just look at it as all
So-
conjecture. It just seems
we
to
could look
make
at it as
sense.
their conjecture, you know. The advantage of that, of this approach seems to be to make you happy if you think you need to put a label on it,
Mhm,
right?
right.
You know, here's a
Because
beast.
It's
what
it's
labels?
ironic, you have the three beasts in each one, you know, the Babylonian,
Yeah.
this one, and then Rome, and it's like, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
You know, nothing else happened after Rome,
right,
you know?
right. So it,
Yeah.
it helps us to be able to say, okay, so we put a label on it. What would be the disadvantage in doing that?
You could be wrong.
You could be wrong. You could be wrong.
What
Or
happens
somebody's
what
left-
happens after Rome?
Yeah,
You
Yeah,
left somebody out.
yeah.
or you left somebody out, you know,
They change from
they
time.
change or whatever.
Yeah, it could have nothing to do with those times, and it all actually reflects on today,
Yeah,
you know, what's happening today, being close
Right.
to the end of times,
right.
so.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Then we don't have to look for evil anyplace else.
That's right.
There's gonna be no other
That's right.
horrible regimes. We got them.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, we
Yeah.
got the ones we
It's
don't.
all over with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of think about, you know, cop shows like Law and Order or whatnot, where they say, this is the suspect, and then they don't look for anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, because we got the guy. It's like, well, no, you don't got the guy. As it turns out in the drama, you know, it turns out to be somebody else. Yeah. Okay, so let's do the second one. So I think we gotta be careful with having that one-on-one identification, say, this is Babylon for sure. You know, I just don't know, you know, because there is, so let's look at this one. What if each of these beasts represents fearsome qualities of secular nations in general? Okay, so how does that work out?
Easier to say it's just human nature.
It's easier to say it's human nature. So what does the first one say human nature is like? And particularly secular nations. What are secular nations like in general?
The government wants to control everything.
Okay, government wants to control things.
Well, is promoting like well, I'm gonna use the United States.
I agree.
Okay, well, no, what I'm saying is we're proclaiming to be so righteous and wonderful and we're setting the world free and all that, but really, human beings are running it, and human beings are evil.
Mhm.
So you're not gonna get on that higher plateau where it's promoting itself as the great lion with wings and it's showing righteousness and wonderful and all that.
Mhm.
That isn't reality. It says right here, the mind of a human.
Mhm.
So that means the guy that's, people are really running that type of institution. So you're never gonna get that perfection.
Mhm.
You can look at it that way too.
Okay. What about the one that looks like a bear? What kind of nation does that, you know, what kind of nation does that describe?
bloody,
Yeah, a bloody one,
Mhm. So that one. Russia.
yeah.
savage, bloody. Well, I know, but you say Russia because Russia is, you know, that's like their mascot is the
Yeah,
bear. But it
right.
could be any bloody, savage nation that just seems to want to rip and tear.
Like the Nazis.
Yeah, Nazis or whatever. Okay. What about the one that looks like a leopard?
Sneaky.
Sneaky. That's interesting. Okay, yeah, okay.
Changes in spots.
Changes in spots, yeah, okay. Among all those kind of things. And what about the one that looks like, you know, who knows what this beast is? In some of the artwork, it looks like kind of like a dragon.
It seems like they get progressively worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Why does it seem like they get progressive? I mean, why is the lion so wonderful? As
Well,
opposed to
it's
the dragon?
not that the lion is so wonderful, it looks like they're all meat eaters, but the lion, it doesn't have ribs hanging out of its mouth and,
Yeah.
it doesn't have foreheads to rip things apart, and it doesn't have iron teeth, so it seems like the beasts get progressively worse.
Mm.
But
Just
it
from
could
my
be-
viewpoint.
The lion could also be the worst of the bunch.
Well, he's probably not
Yeah.
better.
Still waters run deep.
Just do it.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's because we have this glamorized vision of lions, like, you know, the one on MGM, you know, and how majestic they are and all that other kind of stuff. But don't forget, it's
When you
the,
see them in the thing with blood all over their face, you know they're.
well, I mean,
That's an animal.
that's right, it's,
Yeah,
It's
it's,
an animal, it
you
doesn't
know,
matter.
it's
you know?
Satan who prowls around like a roaring lion looking
Yeah.
for someone to, as Pastor Ballas says, slurp down with lots of juice, you know.
I mean, a leopard and a lion are both basically wild animals.
Yeah, they are.
It's just that you can't reference everything to the lion, give it a
When you
different
say-
animal or something like
That's
that,
right.
you know, between the lion, the bear, the leopard,
Yeah,
you know? I mean, it wouldn't put a giraffe in there.
no, no.
Yeah.
That's
You know?
lunch.
Yeah, that's lunch.
Well, as soon as you say beasts, that you think of something that's,
Lions
Yeah,
and
you think
tigers
it's
and
something.
bears.
But
Oh,
yet,
my.
but yet the thing is, are we as any better? You know?
Yeah, right.
I mean, an animal just goes out and kills just for the sake of food. That's
Right.
it. We go out for the sake of, oh, hey, this is fun, let's go out and
Yeah,
do
yeah.
this. You know?
Or for whatever reason.
Yeah. So,
We like to think of lions like, you know, Aslan there, you know, in the Chronicles of Narnia.
yeah.
Mhm.
But go home and watch, but here's a different movie, go home and watch The Ghost of the Darkness and you get a totally different
Yeah.
picture of lions with Michael Douglas and Val Kilmer. Where lions are going around, and they're man-eating lions, and they have to go out and kill
Man-eaters.
these. Yeah, it's an excellent movie, but it's, you know, that's the one where I
Yeah.
always think of, you know, the lion is prowling around, or
But the
Satan's
thing is, it
prowling
was
around like a
bred
lion.
that way.
Huh?
It was bred that way. You
Yeah, yeah.
Once they get a taste.
know?
All right, what if,
is
so let's
this
do
like
this.
Revelation, the beasts? In Revelation, you separated the beasts from creation. They weren't created, they're, okay.
Yeah, in
What I'm saying.
Revelation, there's beasts that come up out of the land and out of the sea that are not created ones.
Right,
Okay.
so these are beasts. Now, because of that, I tend to go with beasts as evil, because of Revelation.
Because of, you know, and thank you for making that association, because we're gonna continue to do that, but one of the things we want to be able to say, that we didn't say quite so much in Revelation, but we could have, is that now that we have done Revelation, as we look at Daniel, we can say, oh, that's where John got that. Oh, that's where John got that. So there's a lot of ways in which John wrote stuff in Revelation that he already knew from, especially Daniel. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just turned to Revelation and it says, the beast resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and authority. And It's, I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, same
right
thing
out
there.
of this
Condenses
is
it.
what you
Condenses
said,
it,
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, so he makes a lot of references in Revelation to
Right.
Daniel. So if we'd have read them the other way around, if we'd have read
Mhm.
Daniel first and then come to Revelation, we would have said, oh, yeah, we've heard this before. Well, we'll do the same thing now. We'll say, oh, we've heard this before. Okay, and John will use this picture again. But when John writes it in Revelation, he will be writing to people who have read this before, and they'll say, we know this from Daniel.
Mm.
And now they'll see what Daniel said has its fulfillment in Christ. And that's the whole point of the book of Revelation. Or I mean, much of the point of the book of Revelation. What Daniel was prophesying was not merely saying, this one is Rome, this one is Russia, this one is Babylon, or whatever. What Revelation is saying, everything that Daniel said is ultimate fulfillment in Christ. No matter what you think, you could point to on that timeline, on that wall. All of it points to Jesus Christ, ultimately. Okay. Don't stop at Alexander and Julius Caesar. Point to Christ. That's where it goes. That's what John says in Revelation. Okay, so the third question under there is, what if the entire vision is a unity describing the world of nations as a fearsome environment in which God's people live?
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
That's why I put that question. I think there are, there are Christians and other people as well that think we ought to have a world in which everybody gets along, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
it ain't happening.
And it ain't happening,
Nope.
okay, and I think, that's an idealistic vision, but, that's not what Scripture says the world is like, generally speaking. It's like this. And the world of nations is generally going to be antagonistic and vicious and nasty, not only to Christians, but to most people, no matter what period of history we're looking at.
And if you want to break that mold, you have to start at home amongst yourselves, and that's an impossible.
Well, I think the thing we need to say is, there's no way to break that mold except with Jesus, except to be with Jesus. That's the only way to do it. Yeah. So, thank you. So let's go to verse 9, and somebody start reading in verse 9. Read verse 9 and 10, and I think this will look familiar.
As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, the hair on his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened.
Okay, so, how much does this remind you of some of the descriptions of the throne room of God in Revelation?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, quite a lot of it. The word Ancient of Days is there. It's used only 3 times in the Old Testament, right here in Daniel, but it does remind us of God in Revelation. That whole description there. Then he continues to discuss verse 11, I continued to watch because of the boastful words. The horn was speaking. Again, the horn is just boasting and so forth. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. Remember in Revelation, the dragon is thrown into the fire that continues to burn forever. And maybe that's one of the joys of heaven. We can look out from heaven and see that burning fire off into the distance. Yeah, see where the dragon is burning forever? Ha ha. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were all to live for a period of time. In my vision, somebody read verse 13 and 14.
In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
Okay, great, thanks so far. I want to talk about this one like a son of man for a moment here. In Daniel, this is just used a few times to refer to this particular individual, although sometimes he talks about, in another chapter later on, he'll talk about somebody like a human being. Somebody who looks like a human being, but I think it's 9 or 10. Okay, but he only uses this a few times, one like a son of man. This phrase, then, it says, is often used by God when addressing Ezekiel. So throughout Ezekiel, God says to Ezekiel, son of man, get up, son of man, go do this, son of man, say this, son of that. And in fact, he'll do this later on to Daniel in chapter 10. Gabriel will come and say to Daniel, he'll address him as son of man. But this reminds me of the way Aslan calls the kids in Chronicles of Narnia sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, if you're familiar with that story. But he does that to distinguish them from other intelligent creatures, because in Narnia, there's critters that talk. Okay, so instead of calling them human beings, he calls them sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, and so Daniel is saying here he sees somebody who looks like a human being. Okay. But and that's all he means there. There's somebody standing there in heaven that looks like a human being. And by Jesus' day, the Jews had limited the use of Son of Man to this individual in Daniel, and assumed he was the Messiah. So even though God in Ezekiel is saying to Ezekiel, Son of Man, do this, Son of Man, do that, just like, hey guy, do this or whatever. By Jesus' day, the word Son of Man, they understood that to mean the Messiah. Okay? The Messiah will do this. And Son of Man was a title that was used only of the Messiah. And so in some of the Gospels, Jesus does this repeatedly. He'll say, when the Son of Man comes, he will do this. When the Son of Man does this, and then his opponents will say, are you saying this about yourself? And he'll say, when the Son of Man comes with angels, you'll see that the Son of Man is telling the truth. And that's partly why they got ticked off at him so much, because he's using that title that they understood to refer to the Messiah, and he's using that of himself. Okay.
When I was a freshman at Wittenberg and took New Testament and Old Testament,
Yeah.
I remember on one of the tests we had to explain all these confusing terms, Son of Man and Man the Son and Son of God and Son. I thought, oh man, I don't know what all the differences are between all those.
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. So, yeah. It kind of depends on where it's used. In Ezekiel, Son of Man is kind of just means human being, like, hey guy, get up and do this. In Daniel, it's just used to refer to this person, one like a Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven and was led into his presence. And the Christians said, that's, and even the Jews said, that's somebody who isn't, it's one like a human being. And they assumed that eventually to be the Messiah. And when we talk about Son of God and Son of Man as Christians, sometimes where we're talking about is Jesus being fully God and fully human.
Yeah.
But when Jesus uses the word Son of Man in the Gospels to refer to himself, the Son of Man will come in glory to do this, to refer to himself, he's really talking about that what we sometimes call the Messiah, but in those days, they used that title, Son of Man, to
Son of
refer to
Man.
the Messiah. And that's what really torqued them off a lot, was that he used that title to refer to himself.
Mm.
All right, let's continue. Verse 15 and 16. Somebody, please.
I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things.
Okay. Just a couple of comments on verse 16 before we continue. On the I approached and asked. In Revelation, John is seems to be too afraid to approach and ask. The elders and angels come to him. You remember in Revelation they come, do you understand what you're seeing here? But Daniel goes to them. Okay, so it's like he has a little more chutzpah than John does. And then this guy gives him the vision, and in 17 and 18, that's just verse 16, 17. Hi, Joanne.
Hi.
Do you need help?
No, I can get the other one.
Okay. In 17 and 18, this is what the vision means. You want more details, read on, but you're only going to get details on the fourth beast. Okay? So, the four great beasts are four kings and will rise from the earth, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. That's what the vision means, okay? In a nutshell. Piece o' cake. The holy people, now, what we want to do is go into detail on the beasts, but the important part is the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. Okay. But if you want details on the beasts, somebody can read 19 through 22. Please.
And I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying. With its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns of a head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom.
Okay, thank you. And somebody, the next paragraph.
He gave me this explanation: the fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and try to change the times set and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times and a half a time.
Okay, thanks. Now, there's a lot of people who try to figure out, what does this mean? A time, times, and a half a time.
Yeah.
Okay? And, they get all, scientific and technical and, 20th century on that and try to figure out exactly what does that mean according to clocks and calendars and all that other kind of jazz. And I think that's real I think that's real 20th century, and I just don't buy it. Okay? I don't know what that means. What if it's simply this? Like I say there, a while, and then a long while, and then a little while. Okay? And as every kid knows, whenever a parent says, only a little while, it's gonna be forever. You know?
Could it be 3.5, half of 7?
Well, see, now,
Now you're going into
you get out
conjecture
your
again.
calculator and, you know.
2 months away.
Yeah, 3.5 is half of 7, and it means this and this, and like, in a little while.
Yeah, I think they did that on purpose.
Yeah,
just for people to go, it's gotta be this, it's gotta be, you know?
it's gonna be in a
Yeah.
little while,
Right.
and it'll be a long while, and it'll be a really long while, so.
And in actuality, it means nothing.
That's what it means when parents say that to kids.
No one knows.
Yeah, nobody knows.
Only
Of
God
course not.
knows when the time is.
That's what I said, he's got his timeline.
I remember being at I don't remember what conference it was some conference a while back, and there was a kid there, a guy there who had been, he'd been really severely injured in an industrial accident, and he was the speaker. And it was a good presentation, but the one thing that I do remember that he said was, he said he wished that the two words that he could get the nurses that took care of him to completely remove from their vocabulary were the words, pretty soon.
Yeah.
As in, when can I have more pain meds?
Yeah.
Pretty soon.
Does that happen?
Or I'll be back in a while.
Yeah,
Hmm?
yeah, well, you were there with me, I
He's
think.
my cousin.
Oh, he's your cousin?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was, you know, I mean, he was an interesting guy, a neat guy and whatnot, but that was the yeah, that was the two words that I wish nurses would remove from their vocabulary. Pretty soon. You know, and then, so when I read this, you know, a time times and half a time, I don't wanna go to, well, is this half a 7, is this 3 years, is this 3 centuries? You know, that's just too, it has the feel to me more like when a parent says, in a little while. Come on.
My
You know,
sister hated it when my mother would say, we'll see.
We'll see,
Yeah.
Can
yeah.
we do this, can we do that? We'll see. She says, I
That's a
figured
no.
out after
Yeah.
a while,
Exactly.
no. I just need to know.
No, but I mean, you know, we watch Aiden. When are we gonna do this? Pretty soon. Oh, I'm so bored. What are we gonna do? This is so boring.
Yeah.
You know.
Whereas for you, a while could be 10 minutes, and for them,
Yeah.
that's an eternity.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Yep.
In the meantime, the most important stuff is 26 and 27. Somebody please read.
The court will sit, and its power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him.
Yeah, okay, so the most important thing is, you know, as dark and gloomy and horrendous and awful as the kingdoms of this world are, maybe this is the way we need to say it. The kingdoms of this world are horrible and dark and gloomy, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do to change it. But the court of God will sit. And it's when that happens that their power will be taken away. It's only when Jesus returns again that things will change. I think that's the issue. We think that we can change things, and we can't. Only Jesus can change things when he comes again in glory, and when he wipes everything out and the New Jerusalem comes. Then everything gets handed over to him, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. That's the only time things will change. And I don't think that's any reason for us to be sad and gloomy. That's something for us to look forward to and rejoice. That's the point of this section and of Revelation. Okay? And then Daniel said, that's the end of it. But he didn't tell anybody. He just wrote it down. Okay? So okay so far on chapter 7. All right, chapter 8. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision. And if we wait for it, the interpretation comes in verse 15. After the one that already appeared to me, He was in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. Looked up, and there was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. Somebody, verse 5, please.
As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
It came toward the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven.
Great, thanks. 9 through 12, please.
Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of the rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, "How long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people." He said unto me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sacrifice will be reconsecrated."
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Couple of things. I didn't interrupt for the whole vision because I just wanted you to hear the whole vision. I think that was just, I don't know that we need to pull it apart. The Holy One in verse 13, I'm not sure whether that's a saint or an angel, and maybe Daniel isn't really either. Okay, a saint, an angel, an elder around the throne like in Revelation, I don't know who it is. Maybe Daniel isn't either, but so we'll just leave it at that.
But it gave an actual date, 2,300 evenings and mornings, so that's 2,300 days, so.
Yep.
And is it well, I'm gonna get real black and white here. Is it talking about the sanctuary of the temple in Jerusalem, or is it something else?
Yes. That's the question. That's the question that we don't know.
I don't know.
Nobody else is either.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm trying to, maybe I'm.
Probably both.
Possibly both, yeah.
Okay.
Nobody knows.
That's the question. And I don't know the answer.
Okay.
It depends on who you read.
Well, we have these modern day soothsayers.
Yes.
That state that one day equals 1 year. So
I
you're
know.
gonna look at the temple being torn down, when Rome tore it down, 63 AD. And, well, now we can add 2,300 years to that. So,
Well,
will they reconstruct, well, I'm just saying what some of them say on the television. Will they put the temple back up, the Jews, will they set up another temple and they'll take away the mosque that's on there now?
Well, yeah,
So,
that
I
could
don't
be,
know,
but.
you know, I don't know.
That could
Okay,
be,
it
but,
started
you know,
with
on the
all-
other hand, what did Jesus himself say? He said, destroy the temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days.
Mhm.
Well, he was referring to his body,
Yeah,
yeah.
so what is this referring to?
Mhm.
Oh.
Right? So let's go to verse 15, and let's read what the interpretation seems to say, at least the one that Daniel gives us.
While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man.
Okay, somebody looks like a human being again.
Continue?
Yep,
And I heard a man's voice from the Uli calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision.
okay, we know who this guy is. He'll show up again in the New Testament.
As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. While he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet.
Okay, somebody, thank you, somebody pick it up at 19 through 22.
He said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. The 4 horns that replace the one that was broken off represent 4 kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power.
Thanks, verse 23 through 25.
In the latter part of the reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not in his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power.
Okay. The vision, thank you, the vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. And then I, Daniel, was worn out, lay exhausted for several days. I got up and went about the king's business and was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. So there you have it. We talked about this last week. This is the vision, and this is the interpretation of the vision. It's pretty exact in terms of if we agree that this was actually written by the Daniel who lived, as we talked about last week, from 605 to about 536 BC. This refers to the time of Alexander the Great, 300 and or so BC. So another 300 years later, this is what this vision is about. The land is conquered by Alexander the Great. The Medes and the Persians are destroyed. The empire is destroyed, and the Greek Empire begins. So, if you want to know more actual truth about how this all works out, you have to see the movie with either Colin Farrell or the one with Richard Burton, and that will tell you the absolute truth about the life of Alexander.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
verse 23 to 25, that doesn't sound like the Roman Empire, that sounds like
No,
Satan.
it's not the Roman Empire yet. That's
That sounds more like Satan.
no. This is not yet.
Okay.
No, hold on to that. Hold on to that thought. This is not the Romans. Last week we talked about the Hellenistic influence on the world as Alexander was conquering that eastern part of the world. We have these guys, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and Alexander the Great as they went on, all those, the Greek language, the Greek literature, and all that other stuff. And Alexander died in 323 BC, and his empire was divided. Now here's his empire. Okay, you can see it. You can see how big it is, and this is overlaid on a map of the world that we have in our day. And it's kind of blurry, but here's Egypt, Libya, here's Saudi Arabia, here's Turkey right now, Greece. This goes all the way to India, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan. You see Alexander's empire is all in this red. I mean, this is where all the Greek influence was, when Alexander was alive. So in a space of 20 years, he went this far. And this is like Babylon, okay? And when he died, the empire was divided into 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. All right, and that's what Daniel's prophet, that's what they're talking about in the first half. So the ram with the horn, or the goat with the horn and whatnot, is Alexander who did all this. The Medes and the Persians were over here. Alexander did all this. When he died, 4 generals, 1, 2, 3, and 4, divided up his empire. And last week when we talked about it, we said that Jerusalem, which is here, Judea, this area, was caught in the middle between this part and this part, and for a while these guys from Egypt ruled it, and then after a while these guys ruled it. These guys from Egypt were nice and let the Jews pretty much do what they needed to do. These guys up here were not so nice, and in fact, that's the one that they're talking about in verse 23. The Jews were eventually ruled by the Syrian Seleucids, including this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. And verse 23 through 25 isn't talking about the Romans, they're talking about this time and around, say, 200 to 164 BC, when the Greeks were still there and they were persecuting the Jews, killing many of them, destroying things, putting up a statue of Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem, doing pagan sacrifices in the temple. That's what it's referring to there. The Romans aren't even in the picture at this point. Okay?
And he will be destroyed, but not by human power. So how was he destroyed?
By the rebellion of God's people that only succeeded because God was there
The
with them.
Maccabees.
The Maccabees.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. They came in and did that, and then at that same time period, the 70s. So this doesn't refer, the Romans aren't even in the picture. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what that's about. So if we go with that this is written by Daniel, who lived in 605 to 536 BC like we had last week, then this is a pretty accurate prophecy of events that will take place from about 330-ish BC all the way to about 165 BC in that land, in terms of a prophetic vision. It'll point directly to those.
But if you read verse 27, Daniel himself says, I Daniel was worn out, I lay exhausted for several days. I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. So
Yeah.
when he was getting his vision, according to this, he didn't know what it meant.
And right.
So, as you brought up last week, there are scholars that proclaim, well, some other guy wrote it.
Well,
But if he didn't, it states
Right.
right here, if you,
well, and that's
You
one of
don't know
the,
what it
that's one of the things that's always part of the conversation about how we deal with prophecy in general, whether we're talking about Daniel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, or, almost any of the prophets, is that there are things that the prophets say that they seem to understand are prophetic, but they don't understand what they're talking about. And this is one of them. If we assume that Daniel of 600 BC, if we assume that that's the Daniel who wrote it, then he understood that this is prophetic, but he did not understand what it was all about. And there are places in Daniel, Isaiah and other prophets where that also seems to be the case. There's other passages in some of the prophets where they're writing things that they did not necessarily think they were prophetic, but other guys later on took them to be prophetic. Like Hosea might say something and he might write something about. This is, a classic example is that passage about out of Egypt have I called my son. He's writing about what happened in the past, about how the people of Israel came out